Welcome to Criminology Chats. I'm your host, J.R. Rainbolt. We are back, everyone, with new episodes. We hope you all enjoyed your summer. We sure enjoyed ours. Time to get back, though, to crime school. Catch us every other week on Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on your favorite podcast player or on YouTube at Criminology Chats Podcast. For today's episode, I am joined by one of my co-hosts, Grace Farrell. December 8, 2024. It's just after 6:30 in the morning in Greeley, Colorado. A father calls 911 and says words no parent should ever have to say. His daughter has been shot. When officers get to the house, they find 24-year-old Sierra Menninger barely alive near the front door. A single gunshot wound to the head. And inside the home, only two other people. Her father and her ex-boyfriend, who immediately tells police this was suicide.
Which that already sounds a little suspicious when you're immediately telling the police something.
Right. Because before detectives are done with him, that same ex-boyfriend will tell three different stories about what happened that night. And only one ends with the truth.
And what makes this case especially hard is that after Sierra died, almost everyone in her life had said the same thing. We knew something bad was going to happen.
Just couldn't stop it. This is the murder of Sierra Menninger. This episode contains discussions of domestic violence, emotional abuse, suicide claims, and homicide involving a young woman. Listener discretion is advised.
This episode is for informational purposes only and does not constitute psychological, medical, legal, or professional advice. We're using police records, interviews, and investigative documents, but this episode is for informational purposes only.
Before Sierra Menninger became a headline, she was a 24-year-old, young, funny, and social woman. The kind of person who liked being out with friends, music, dancing, late nights, all of it. Probably like my co-host, but we won't go there on that. And according to the people closest to her, she was finally starting to feel like herself again.
And this is important because that tells us where she was at emotionally and mentally. She wasn't spiraling. She was not being isolated. She was just rebuilding. And part of that rebuilding meant trying to separate herself from a relationship that had become unhealthy. That relationship was with Gabriel, otherwise known as Gabe Esparza. And from the outside, they looked like a serious couple. They were long term, they shared a home, they shared pets, they built a life together. But privately, that was a completely different story.
Multiple friends described Gabe as controlling. He didn't like Sierra going out. He didn't like her spending time with friends. He got angry if she stayed out too late. And several people said he was obsessed with whether she was cheating on him.
And then comes the part that really made me stop, the gun, because wasn't just one person mentioning it. Several people had told the police that Gabe used the gun during arguments. One friend said Sierra once hid Gabe's gun after he threatened to hurt himself. Another said he pointed the gun at Sierra herself and told her, "If I die, you die too." And that's completely terrifying. That's not just anger, that's control, that's manipulation, and that's someone making somebody else feel like leaving could cost them their life.
Exactly. I got news for you. Back in the day when I was dating my wife, if she pulled a gun out on me and threatened all that kind of stuff, I'd be gone. I'd be out of there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, immediately.
Yeah. And Sierra was trying to leave. She and Gabe had officially broken up months before this incident. He'd been removed from the lease that was on the house that they had together. He wasn't supposed to be living there anymore, but he kept showing up to see the dogs because they had some dogs together, to talk, just to check in. Whatever the reason, he still had access.
And that's another thing that people misunderstand. Just because a relationship ends doesn't mean the abuse ends. And typically in domestic violence, that tends to get worse after the person leaves.
Yes, that's correct. How many times have we seen that in our stories and episodes that we've done in
Yeah.
the past, right? Yeah. Friends said Sierra had even talked about getting her restraining order against Gabe, but she never did. And unfortunately, that's where this story gets even harder because on the night Sierra died, Gabe was back in her house, back in her bedroom, and by sunrise, Sierra would be gone. Now, police have two people inside the house, Sierra's father, Jeremy, and Gabe, the ex-boyfriend.
And who, just to recap for everybody, he's a self-admitted gang member. He has a history involving firearms. He's on probation and is immediately telling the police that she was suicidal.
Yeah, over and over, he kept saying that. So That would raise my suspicion, wouldn't it you, if he kept saying
Definitely.
that?
Mhm. Yeah, especially if they're walking in and that's the first thing he's saying, that's very suspicious, which it's also important because when people repeat something immediately before investigators are even asking detailed questions.
Yeah, that stands out.
Exactly, definitely.
Now, Gabe was emotional at the crime scene, crying, upset, and according to Gabe, he and Sierra had broken up. He told the police that, but they were trying to work things out. He tells police he had been sleeping in the same bed as Sierra that night. And then he says he woke up because of a loud bang.
Which he told the police was the gunshot.
Right. He says he woke up and Sierra had already shot herself. Case closed. That's his story.
Except Jeremy's story starts creating some problems during this investigation because Jeremy tells police officers that when he got home around 3 o'clock in the morning after being out with his friends, he saw lights on in Sierra's room, but he didn't think much of it. He headed to bed and he fell asleep around 3:30 and then suddenly he wakes up. And it wasn't because of a gunshot like Gabe had told the police. He said it was because somebody was pounding on his door.
Yeah, and that someone was Gabe screaming Sarah's name. So when Jeremy opens the door and notices something immediately, there was blood on the door, a bloody handprint.
Which, let's just take a pause. If Gabe supposedly woke up and instantly ran for help, how did he already have blood on his hands?
Yeah, that's kind of makes me question, right? How did he get the blood on his hands? Did he try to save her? Was he doing CPR or something beforehand or what? That's exactly what one of the details investigators starts paying attention to. Jeremy says he ran into Sierra's room and what he sees is chaos. Sierra's on the bed, unresponsive, and what's strange is Gabe is standing nearby holding a gun to his head.
What?
I know. Jeremy says he immediately grabbed the gun away from Gabe, runs downstairs, hides the gun, then comes back to the room and starts yelling at Gabe to call 911 and asking him to help with Sierra and to do something. But Jeremy says Gabe just looks almost disconnected. He just kind of standing there staring off into the distance, like he wasn't processing what was really happening.
Which can definitely happen after seeing something traumatic. You're in shock. But Jeremy, he felt like something was off with Gabe.
Yeah, he really did. Jeremy later tells the police something that becomes incredibly important. After hearing information about the bullet trajectory, he started believing Gabe may have stood over Sierra while she was lying in bed and shot her.
And Jeremy isn't just pulling this information out of nowhere. He starts telling investigators that Gabe definitely had a violent history. He says that he'd seen Gabe carry guns, he's seen him threaten Sierra, and he has heard about previous incidents, including a drive by shooting involving Gabe's other ex girlfriend. Because now investigators are hearing this and probably thinking, okay, maybe this is not a suicide investigation anymore. This may be something completely different.
Yeah, hearing that background, Grace, about the other ex-girlfriend and a possible drive-by, that kind of starts to show or present kind of a pattern, if you will, right? A pattern
Definitely.
of what's going on here. And then when the police get to the hospital, Sierra's still alive at that point when they get her to the hospital, but barely. She's in intensive care. Doctors are trying to save her. Family is gathering around, and police are trying to determine whether they will get a chance to talk with her. But medical staff noticed something else: fresh bruising, older bruising, and injuries on her body like.
Yeah, and this obviously it's going to raise a lot of questions about any previous abuse that she may have faced because of Gabe. So now investigators have to ask, are these medical intervention injuries or just signs of prior violence?
Yeah, and while this is happening, the neurosurgeon delivers devastating news to the family. Sarah's injury isn't survivable. So her father, her sisters there, her brother, they're all there holding her hand saying goodbye. And around 8:47 that morning, 24-year-old Sierra Miniger died.
And now this investigation is just waiting for the results of the autopsy. However, the police decide, and rightfully so, to treat this case as a possible homicide, and they start processing the scene. And what they find next only creates more questions.
Detectives start processing Sierra's bedroom, and almost immediately things stop lining up with Gabe's original story because remember, his first version was simple. Sierra shot herself while he was asleep beside her. He woke up, ran for help, end of story.
Right, and that's just the picture that he's painting for the police.
Exactly. But investigators start finding details that don't fit that picture. They recover a 9mm shell casing in the bed. Now, I'm not as concerned about that. If she shot herself while laying in bed, then that might still be in bed, right? But there was a projectile lodged in the wall, and then they find something under Sierra's pillow, a brass key.
That sounds honestly very random until throughout the investigation process, they say that they believe it may have been placed there after Sierra was shot. And now the detectives are asking, why would anything be moved? Why would the scene be touched at all? Because once things start changing positions, people start wondering if someone is trying to change the story, to change the narrative. And there's another huge issue, the medical examiner, because this is where everything changes.
Yeah. And you always have to wait until that autopsy's done because that's so important because most
Hmm.
of the time the forensic pathologist can determine if everything lines up with a certain story, if you will, or a suicide or whatever. So Sierra autopsy starts providing some answers, and they're not small answers. Investigators collect gunshot residue samples, examine her injuries, document everything, and doctors notice something. No defensive wounds, no injuries on her hands, but when they examine the gunshot wound itself, there is no soot, no stippling, no charring.
And if you're unfamiliar with any of these terms, this just means that those details can help determine how close a firearm was when it was fired.
Right. Have worked several gunshot suicides, and you will always find soot in the wound,
Hmm.
stapling, and that's going to be the break in her skin around there, and charring. And that's because of what comes out of the end of the barrel when
Right.
the
Yeah.
bullet is fired. It's going to burn. It's going to be some charring. And that means that's a very close contact, and that's what you expect to see in a suicide.
Exactly. But they didn't see that in Sierra.
No, they didn't see that. According to the medical examiner, this wasn't contact range, which is what you expect to see in a suicide. This wasn't just inches away. The estimated distance, 4 to 5 feet.
Wow. 4 to 5 feet. So if Gabe's original story is Sierra was shooting herself while lying right next to him in bed, how is that possible?
Yeah, that's not. That's the problem. Because investigators now have evidence suggesting the shot came from a distance, not from Sierra holding the gun to her own head, and the medical examiner reaches a conclusion. Cause of death, gunshot wound to the head, manner of death, homicide.
And that's a massive piece of information that we got from the autopsy because at this point, detectives aren't asking if Gabe is involved. Now they're asking what had actually happened inside that bedroom because of Gabe.
Exactly. And during a search before transporting Gabe to the police station to talk to him from the scene, police discovered something in his pocket, a shell casing. Now remember, there was a shell casing in the bed and now a shell casing in his pocket.
So there's another one. Okay.
Exactly. And investigators immediately want an explanation because now they're looking at him thinking, how did that get there? Why are you carrying it? And Gabe actually has an answer ready.
To me with that, it kinda seems like he was almost prepping himself, and he says he found it in the backyard earlier that night, he picked it up, put it in his pocket, why not? Just because. But the more they investigate, the more the story starts shifting, and Gabe, he's about to start changing his story too, multiple times. Okay, JR, this is where things start getting wild because Gabe's first story was that Sierra killed herself.
Right.
And then evidence starts coming in, and suddenly that story starts having major problems.
Detectives are looking at an entirely different picture because now they're asking, was Sierra murdered? Investigators start interviewing friends, ex girlfriends, people close to Sierra, people close to Gabe. And what was starting to emerge is a pattern.
Right. And those patterns, obviously, they matter in this case because detectives aren't just trying to understand one night anymore. They're trying to understand Sierra and Gabe's relationship. What was happening behind closed doors and whether this violence had been building and if there was a repeated pattern.
And in doing that and getting some more background, the first people investigators speak with is Devin. He worked at the Box, which is in downtown Greeley, Colorado, and he worked there as a DJ, bartender, manager, and Sierra was a regular there.
And Devin told investigators that his relationship with Sierra wasn't exactly just casual friends. He actually told the police that they had been involved on and off for around a year. And according to him, he saw Sierra the night she died. She came into the bar with her friends. They were hanging out, drinking, playing beer pong, just a normal night for a 24-year-old woman. This is important because investigators are trying to piece together Sierra's mindset at the time. Was she scared?
Right. And Devin says something investigators probably paid very close attention to. I'm assuming he received a Snapchat from Sierra around 4:49 that morning. So if he received a Snapchat from her, then we know she was alive at around 4:49 a.m. One of the last messages he ever got from her. And according to him, nothing about it suggested fear. Nothing suggested she was panicked. Nothing suggested someone was about to take their own life or be murdered by someone.
And then Gabe, he comes up because he just keeps coming up.
Yeah, he's just kind of lingering around there all the
Yep.
time. Devin tells investigators Sierra describes Gabe as crazy. That's the word he used, potentially violent. And Devin says he intentionally distanced himself from Sierra at one point because of Gabe.
And that's saying a lot. Just thinking about that, someone is deciding to back away because they're concerned about somebody else's behavior. That's not a small fact.
No, it's not. It's really not. The detectives talk to Lucy next, and Lucy gets emotional real fast because she had just come from seeing Sierra at the funeral home. Lucy tells police that she heard Gabe threaten Sierra with a gun. She says Gabe had been physically abusive, controlling, volatile, and she says Sierra had been trying to get away. And now Lucy is a close friend of Sierra's, and that's why the police talk with.
And again, that's another huge fact that Lucy brings up is she was trying to get away from Gabe. Those words hit differently after hearing what had actually happened. And Lucy also says that Sierra would never kill herself, ever. She describes Gabe as someone with rage issues, someone who always carried a gun, someone who had trouble letting go. And she told detectives Sierra had started changing. She was working out more, she was going out, she was spending time with her friends, talking to new people, just moving forward and living her life.
Yeah, and that is a sign there that, you know, she was trying to be more independent from Gabe. And
Exactly.
Lucy believed that Gabe was losing control. And we all know based on research that whenever someone who is controlling like Gabe starts to lose control, bad things
Gets a
can
little
happen.
more violent. Yeah, that's a really important phrase because when investigators hear multiple people describing Gabe as, controlling, he had jealousy issues, anger issues, there's fear between Sierra and Gabe. Those aren't isolated comments anymore. They're becoming a pattern of who Gabe is as a person.
And then if we remember, Jeremy said something about Gabe's ex-girlfriend and a drive-by. So naturally, police at some point in time probably are going to be interviewing his ex-girlfriend. And in fact, they decide to talk with the ex-girlfriend and what kind of a story they're going to get from her. So her name is Jasmine, and we're going to keep first names only. So detective next interviewed Jasmine, Gabe's ex-girlfriend, and almost immediately investigators start hearing things that sound eerily similar.
And anytime the investigators hear the phrase, quote unquote, this happened before, ears immediately go up because now they're asking, is this just a one time tragedy or is this a repeating pattern?
Jasmine tells police she started dating Gabe back in 2019. At first, things felt normal, good relationship, no issues. And if you remember, Grace, we talked to a gentleman about how in the beginning, maybe the first 4 to 6 months, it's all lovey-dovey, love
Mhm.
bombing, a lot
The
of that
love
kind of stuff,
bombing.
right? And no major issues. That's what Jasmine is saying. But then things started to change. She says Gabe became controlling, didn't like her going out, questioned where she was, questioned who was she with, started accusing her of cheating. We
You
see a
know,
pattern.
we've heard this before, obviously, with Gabe jealousy, the control, the fear of losing somebody.
Exactly. And Jasmine says eventually she learned something that Gabe was actually cheating on her. So she ended the relationship, and according to her, that did not go well. Not at all.
Yeah, and that's again, just to reiterate, that's usually how it goes with relationships like that. She said that Gabe told her that they weren't breaking up. He threatened to kill any guy that she would talk to. He threatened her, he threatened her family. And now detectives are hearing threats connected to breakups again.
Investigators hear about something even bigger. In October of 2020, Gabe allegedly shot at Jasmine's parents' house.
What?
Yeah, her mother was there, family members were there, and according to Jasmine, Gabe carried out a drive-by shooting. He was later, of course, arrested.
So suddenly, Jeremy's earlier comments, they don't sound random anymore because remember Sierra's father had mentioned another ex, Jasmine, and another shooting, so the drive-by.
Exactly. Now, detectives have someone describing prior violence after a breakup, threats, escalation, anger, and investigators are probably seeing similarities, a lot of similarities.
But there's one detail from Jasmine's interview with investigators that really stood out to me about this case is that she tried to get protection, a restraining order.
And according to her, it didn't happen. And she said that the reason why the judge didn't grant a restraining order was because Jasmine no longer lived at her parents' house. She was told she wasn't considered in immediate danger because she no longer lived there because that's where he did the drive-by, even
Exactly.
though she brought messages, threats, and screenshots. Now, I'm just thinking about this logically, right? Even if she's not living there, if she's living somewhere else, why wouldn't he go there to do that? So wouldn't a
Yeah,
restraining order? I don't understand, but I'm not an attorney. I'm not a legal person, so I don't know all the legalities when it comes to these.
I mean, yeah, he seems like he'd be the person to kind of find her wherever she was, which it's really heartbreaking to hear after everything that had came later and what happened to Sierra. Jasmine also said that Gabe used to grip her wrist during arguments to the point where it was hard enough that it left marks on her. And while she says he didn't physically beat her, she still says something that investigators absolutely had to pay attention to. She felt very afraid during the relationship. And after it ended, she felt fear. And that's now again becoming a repeated theme here.
Yeah, fear, control, jealousy, threats. And detectives still aren't done interviewing people because next, another friend tells police about guns, suicide threats, and a relationship that seemed to be unraveling. So the next person that the detectives speak with is Destiny. Now, she's another close friend of Sierra. And unlike some of the other interviews, Destiny didn't spend a huge amount of time around Gabe, but sometimes it was the people standing on the outside who noticed things differently.
Yeah, and that's because like Destiny, they're seeing, the little moments between Sierra and Gabe, the comments, the behavior, just stuff that might not seem important at that time.
Exactly. But little things in an investigation can be very important. Destiny tells investigators she met Sierra about a year earlier, and she says Gabe mostly kept to himself, didn't socialize much, stayed kind of distant. But over time, she started noticing comments from Sierra, things that sounded small at first, like Sierra worrying about getting home too late or being nervous about getting into trouble.
Yeah, huge, huge red flags. And, hearing that now, it lands completely differently because adults in relationships generally aren't worried about being in trouble. That seems like childish behavior that shouldn't be coming from a grown woman.
Exactly, exactly. That's right. And Destiny says at the time she brushed it off, didn't think much about it. But later, looking back, those comments felt different.
Yeah, in hindsight, it's brutal.
Yeah, I know. We always say hindsight's 2020. Man, it really is. Destiny tells detectives she knew Sierra had cheated on Gabe with Devin, and after that, she says Gabe became verbally abusive, calling Sierra names, insults, putting her down. And then Sierra suddenly deleted her entire Facebook account.
Which investigators probably had to look at too, because now they're asking, was Sierra trying to start over? Was she trying to reconnect with Gabe, distance herself from people?
Destiny wasn't sure about that though, but then she describes one incident that immediately gets investigators' attention: an argument, a gun, and a suicide threat.
And according to Destiny, Gabe actually had pulled out a gun during an argument and threatened to kill himself. And Sierra started screaming for help. And this isn't the first time investigators are hearing about Gabe obviously introducing a gun into conflict and argument.
Yeah, not even close. But now detectives have heard multiple stories: gun threats, intimidation, control, jealousy, emotional manipulation. And Destiny says something else that stood out. She says Sierra often didn't want to go home, especially on Saturdays, especially if Gabe was there.
Yeah, and that's saying a lot. It's honestly like it's very hard to hear because home isn't it's supposed to be somewhere where you feel the safest. And Destiny believed that Sierra felt trapped, like she felt alone. And she thought Sierra may have gone back to Gabe because she felt she didn't have many people left in her life. And this is something investigators hear a lot in abusive relationship cases: isolation, losing their support systems, and feeling stuck.
Yeah, and detectives continue interviewing people. And another close friend starts describing incidents involving guns, threats, and one terrifying statement. And we've heard this before, I think, earlier on. If I die, you're dying too. Detectives continue interviewing Sierra's friends. And next, they sit down with Maria, another close friend. And Maria starts describing a relationship that sounds increasingly dangerous.
And at this point in the investigation, we're hearing similar themes from multiple people: control, jealousy, threats, guns, and every new interview seems to add another layer of these elements.
Now, Maria tells investigators Sarah once discovered Gabe had been cheating on her, and that discovery led to a major fight. Things escalated in the fight, as it often can do fast. During the argument, Maria says Gabe pulled out a pistol and threatened to kill himself.
And again, there's another gun, there's another argument, another suicide threat. But according to what Sierra had told Maria, this time Sierra managed to take the gun away and she hid it, which probably felt like the right thing to do in the moment. Get the gun away, create distance and make things safer.
Except, according to Maria, that made Gabe furious. She says that Sierra told her Gabe became aggressive, started trying to physically force the issue, trying to get the gun back. And then things allegedly became even stranger because Maria says Gabe's family started contacting Sierra, calling her, pressuring her, telling her to return the gun because Gabe needed it.
What could he, possibly need it for?
Well, if you remember, according to things in the we heard at the very beginning, he was a self-admitted gang member, and according to Maria, because of gang connections, he needed that for protection and street issues. Whatever the reason, Sierra felt pressured, and eventually Gabe got the gun back. And after that, things escalated again.
Yeah, and Maria goes on to say after another argument, Gabe ran outside, he fired the gun into the air and then pointed it directly at Sierra. According to Maria, Gabe said, and I quote, "If I die, you're dying with me." That's terrifying to hear from, a partner, somebody you're supposed to love, because that's not anger in the moment. That's ownership, that's control, and that's someone tying another person's fate to their own.
Exactly. And, of course, I have never been a young woman, never been, so I don't know how that makes someone feel, but I look at it outside looking in. All this is going on. I just wish Maria had got away from this guy, got a restraining order, and it just makes me feel sad. You know what I'm saying? And Maria goes on to tell detectives she believed Gabe had a history of reacting violently to breakups, that he didn't handle rejection well. And by this point, investigators have now heard similar versions of that from multiple people, different friends, different relationships, different years, and same themes.
And then Maria says something that hits very hard. She believed that Sierra planned to get a restraining order because Gabe had shown up uninvited. He used a key, he entered the home. But according to Maria, Sierra never followed through with this restraining order.
And hearing that after everything that's happened, it's just hard enough to wonder what might have changed had that happened.
Yeah, but we did do the last podcast we did. We kind of learned that sometimes restraining orders don't do much.
No, don't work. Nope.
Yeah. And now detectives have witness after witness describe violence, threats, patterns, but then investigators decide to interview someone else, someone very close to Gabe, which is his mother.
And detectives sit down with Gabe's mother, Maria, not to be confused with Sierra's friend Maria. And this interview feels different because she isn't coming in defensive. She isn't immediately making excuses. In fact, she's emotional, very emotional.
I mean, as a mother, probably would be in this instance, according to investigators. She says something right away that stands out. She tells them that she's not there to justify her son's actions. She says Gabe is her only son, and she's crying. She's upset. She's trying to process what has happened. But she also says something else. She doesn't think this was premeditated because, according to her, he loved Sierra. And hearing that creates a very complicated moment because families can hold two truths at once. They can love somebody deeply and still recognize terrible things that have happened.
Yeah, Maria begins giving detectives background on Gabe. She says he was born and raised in Greeley, played sports, went to school locally. For a while, things seemed pretty normal, but then life changed. She says Gabe was extremely close with his grandparents, and after they died, he took it very hard because of his close relationship with them. Really, really hard. And that could be a trigger again, a little bit of a trigger thing going on here.
And she believes that around obviously this time when his grandparents died very close together, and this is when things started shifting. According to Maria, Around 19 years old, Gabe had started moving toward gang culture. He was associating with the wrong people, wearing certain colors, becoming connected to certain gang circles. And she says by this time she realized how serious it was and she felt like it was too late.
Yeah, Maria tells detectives that eventually they had a falling out. The relationship became distant. She hadn't seen him for months, didn't really know what was happening in his life anymore. And then investigators asked about something important, the previous ex girlfriend and the shooting there.
Yeah, the drive-by and Maria, his mother, she does confirm it. She tells detectives that after Gabe's breakup in 2020, he shot at the ex-girlfriend's parents' house, and she says that after that happened, she thought things had gotten better. He got a job, he then met Sierra. He seemed more stable, which is kind of hard to hear knowing where this story leads to because for a moment it sounds like people thought he was turning his life around. Then the detective says something interesting. He tells Maria there appears to be a pattern. Breakups, there's anger, escalation, violence, and asks whether she had seen those patterns as well. And that's obviously a very tough question to ask a parent, let alone somebody's mother.
Exactly. And Maria says she doesn't really know because by then she and Gabe barely had a relationship.
And now investigators have heard from friends, an ex girlfriend, family. They've heard about control, threats, jealousy, violence. And one thing keeps showing up: what happens when relationships end?
Detectives still need to hear from one person again, the person whose story changed more than anyone else, Gabe. So they're going to talk to him once again.
So now they're sitting down with Gabe. And at this point, this interview feels very different because detectives aren't walking into this conversation blind anymore. They have a lot of different accounts from different people. And now they have the crime scene, the autopsy, more witness statements, friends, former partners, and multiple versions of Gabe's own story of what happened, which means that detectives already know one thing, that something is not adding up.
Remember earlier at the scene, Gabe was distraught, crying, saying Sierra was suicidal, talking about wanting to see her, and detectives initially approached him almost like a witness, not a suspect, at least not right away.
Which that makes sense because they're still trying to determine what actually happened, but now the picture is very different for them.
Yeah. Gabe starts talking about Sierra again, and now he keeps referring to her as his girlfriend.
That's interesting because earlier he had emphasized that they were broken up.
Right. He tells detectives Sierra invited him over. They spent time together. Everything seemed fine. Then Sierra went out to the bar with friends, returned home sometime after 1 in the morning, and according to Gabe, she seemed irritated. But he says they didn't really talk, no major fight, no confrontation, nothing significant. Then he says he fell asleep and woke up to a gunshot.
Gabe starts describing Sierra's mental health. He says that she had struggled before. He talked about previous suicidal thoughts, and he claimed that she once barricaded herself in a room and he had broken down that door trying to help her. And then he goes on to tell detectives that Sierra's father knew about all of these mental health issues.
Exactly. Then detectives ask more questions about the gun, about the night, about details, and Gabe says something interesting. He says the gun Sierra supposedly used was his, 9 millimeter, but then he adds something. He says he never kept a round chamber.
Except multiple friends had already described something completely different. Multiple people told investigators that Gabe always kept a round ready. Why would you carry around a gun if it's not loaded in case, you're self-admitted gang member?
Exactly.
Now he's kind of getting confused with his own story, it sounds like. So then evidence starts coming in, and suddenly that story starts having major problems.
Yeah.
His first version of the story was suicide. And so what's version two?
Well, version two is going to be the old Russian roulette story.
That does not line up with his first story.
Sure does. Now Gabe tells detectives he and Sierra were playing Russian roulette. Do you know what that is? He says he gets a thrill from not knowing whether a bullet is loaded. And according to Gabe, he pointed the gun at Sierra, pulled the trigger. You don't really play Russian roulette with a 9 millimeter pistol. You typically play Russian roulette with a revolver
With a
because
revolver,
you
yeah.
put one round in the revolver, flip the cylinder, close it, put it to your head, pull the trigger, or point it at somebody, pull the trigger. So funny that he's saying they're playing Russian roulette with a pistol.
So we're just casually jumping into we're just playing Russian roulette because that's a massive shift in the story.
Huge, because now we're no longer talking about suicide. Now Gabe is actually admitting he pulled the trigger.
which detectives immediately noticed. But, the investigators, they're still not buying it because they're asking, why are the stories changing now? Why is he leaving out details? And why is he only admitting things after evidence starts stacking up?
They start applying some pressure, but they're not yelling, not accusing, just pushing little inconsistencies, little details, and eventually Gabe realizes something. The story isn't standing up to the evidence.
And eventually, Gabe's story changes again. And this time, detectives think that they're finally getting closer to the actual reason.
Yeah, Gabe says Sierra invited him over that night. They were trying to work things out, trying to fix the relationship, but he wanted answers, specifically about other men, about whether Sierra had been seeing someone else.
And based on what Sierra's friends had later told police, Gabe had already had major jealousy issues with Sierra.
Exactly. Gabe says they started talking, then arguing, and according to him, Sierra basically told him, I'm a grown woman. I don't answer to you. I can do what I want. And let's
Exactly.
face it, she could.
She
I mean,
could have.
she
Yep.
has that right, you know. And remember, this isn't happening in the vacuum. Investigators have statements from friends, former partners, family members, people describing jealousy, control threats, guns, fear. And now detectives are trying to answer one final question. Was Sierra's death an accident or the final escalation in a long pattern?
And that's kind of what she was starting to do. Investigators believed that that's kind of the moment that things started escalating because Gabe probably felt like he was already losing her.
Exactly. Gabe says he got angry, so angry that he grabbed his gun, knowing he wasn't even supposed to possess one. Because remember, he had already had problems in his background and wasn't supposed to have a gun anyway. And he says he pulled it out to intimidate her, not to shoot her, not to kill her, just to scare her.
And that, I mean, already sounds dangerous. If you love this person, why?
Exactly. Have you had any boyfriends that pulled a gun on you just to
No,
threaten you?
no,
Exactly. That's
absolutely
not a normal. Yeah, it's not normal.
not normal at all.
No. And Gabe says he stood near the edge of the bed, about 4 or 5 feet away, pointed the gun at Sierra, and Sierra told him, "You won't pull the trigger." And Gabe says he pulled it.
Wow. I mean, the detectives now have a distance that suddenly sounds very familiar, from the autopsy because the medical examiner estimated that the firing distance 4 to 5 feet.
Exactly. Matches almost exactly what the medical examiner said.
Gabe keeps saying that he didn't know there was a round chambered, but that he only wanted to scare her. But investigators have already heard multiple people say something very different. They said Gabe always had a round chambered. Always. He was always ready. And if that's true, then detectives have to ask him, did he really not know? Or is that just another part of his story that he's fabricating? And I
Mhm.
keep coming back to Sierra because while all of this is happening, we've heard friends describe someone trying to move forward with their life. She was going out, seeing friends, making plans, trying to create distance, trying to reclaim her own life and her independence.
Exactly. And multiple people told investigators the same thing. They didn't believe Sierra was suicidal at all, not even a little bit. In fact, they described someone making future plans, talking about life, talking about what came next.
Which it contradicts Gabe's first statement of her committing suicide because from the beginning he repeatedly pushed one idea that Sierra had done this herself.
Right. Clearly, the detectives reached a different conclusion because the evidence, the autopsy, the witnesses, and eventually Gabe's own words all pointed somewhere else. And eventually, prosecutors would decide there was enough evidence to move forward.
But this case leaves behind a bigger conversation too about the warning signs, about patterns, and about the moments people only recognize when they look back at it later.
Yeah, there was one final chapter in this case. More than a year after Sierra's death, the criminal case reached its conclusion. And in December 2025, Gabe Esparza pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Sierra couldn't tell the story, and Gabe was the only one there. Nobody witnessed anything, and he continued to claim, I didn't know a round was in the chamber. So no one, even though they had all this circumstantial evidence, they couldn't prove that his intent was to murder her.
Right. Which it's significant because after all the changing stories, after the investigation, after all the interviews, and after everything investigators had spent months piecing together, there was finally an admission of responsibility. And with that plea came a sentence. And Gabe was eventually sentenced to 40 years behind bars. And numbers like that can sound huge. 40 years in prison doesn't sound pleasing, but for families like Sierra's family, sentencing is it's complicated because justice and healing, they're not always the same thing.
That's right. A sentence closes a court case, but it doesn't close grief. It doesn't rewind time, and it doesn't give Sierra's family their daughter, sister, or friend back.
Now, Sierra was young. She was 24 years old. And throughout this entire investigation, the people who loved her kept describing the same person. She was making plans, someone trying to move forward, someone rebuilding their life.
And maybe that's where we leave Sierra's story. Not with evidence, not with interrogation rooms, not with court documents, but with Sierra. Because before she became a case, she was a person and she mattered. Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. That's www.thechicagoschool.edu. I would like to extend my gratitude to the students who always participate in these episodes. We want to hear from our listeners, so please email us at criminologychatspodcast@gmail.com. That's CRIMINOLOGYCSPODCAST@gmail.com. And also, please check out our YouTube channel at https://www.youtube.com/@Criminology Chats Podcast. This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters with additional post-production services provided by Audio Photo Synthesis. I'm J.R. Rainbolt, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode. Be safe out there.
The views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers of the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers of the Chicago School.